Good now? Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. It's my first time. I hope not the last one. I hope I didn't cause the snow situation. And let me say, I really enjoy having the chance to read Francesca's paper. So I'd like to start with a broader question here, which is the question of how individuals form beliefs. When I teach this in my PhD class, this belief topic, I always start with this diagram, okay, which is we have some environments, an economic environment from which people are going to form some belief or some perceptions about future values of endogenous variables, and then these beliefs will have some impact on what people do, and this is going to look at outcomes. Again, a lot of the literature has been very active in the last 10 to 15 years, has focused on sort of number one or number two. I'll say most of this paper, though Francesca put a little bit of emphasis in the presentation, I'll say more on the paper about number two. I think it's about number one. Okay, so what this paper really is going to contribute, it's going to answer this question, which is the question of how do equity analysts justify their forecasts, their beliefs. Okay, and the question more narrow should be like, what do they write, or sort of how do they reason, if we're going to infer this from their writing. And again, the key contributions to the paper is going to be to look at these analyst reports over the last 25 years, and they're going to use these large language models to extract what the paper call mental models. I'm going to be more precise about this in a second, but again, what the paper called a mental model is a combination of evaluation method, and very roughly, it's something like discounted cash flow method or some multiple. I think that really covers most of what evaluation methods are there. And then what the paper calls attention, okay, which are these, use a bit of idea, it's like topics, channels, time outlook, like forward-looking, backward-looking, sentiment, positive or negative, okay? And again, if I want to summarize in one line the results, the paper's going to tell us that these models are going to be sparse in the sense that not every topic or characteristic shows up in every report. They are rigid in the sense that there's some persistence or there's some patterns either through firms or through individuals that are they're going to be sort of IID moving around all the time. And I would say attention, these topics, channels, that's going to be more important rather than whether people change, people use DCF or a multiple. I think this is really, if you're going to remember something, these are kind of the three things you need to remember. I enjoy the paper. I think it's a nice contribution. It's a very natural use of large language models. As I just said, in the last decade or so, there's been a lot of work on beliefs and so on, and I think this is a nice complement to work on surveys, okay? So I think it's really nice. There's a lot of interesting facts. I think you saw Francesca's bullets all over the paper. It's also like, it's really overwhelming, the amount of things that one can get once you start going down this path, as you can imagine. So in my discussion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of go through the three main parts: the conceptual framework, the data collection exercise, and then the empirical findings. I'll give you some remarks along the way, and then I'm going to conclude to sort of two more bigger picture comments for sort of broader agenda in this area down the road. Good. So the paper spends quite a bit of time on the model, actually. Like a good first chunk of the paper is about this framework, okay? And let me just explain to you also one slide. Let's see if I can do a good job here. You have a single analyst, so there's no equilibrium, no strategic interaction. And the truth takes that form, okay? So the price is the sum of some V's, those are parameters, okay? And some X, the X are characteristics, okay? So that's sort of what the truth is. And then this, the agents are going to have a forecast. They're going to end up choosing something else with them. You're going to see in a second, but essentially they're going to say, if X is what I think the characteristic is, I'm going to report a price that is M times X, okay? Now, they're going to observe perfectly what's going on in terms of the X. So they're going to have a signal, and they're able to choose the precision of that signal. Now, again, what the paper is calling a method are these M's. Okay, so think of these M's are like fixed numbers that you can choose. You're going to see in a second the structure, and then think of taus as you choosing the precision of the information that you have. And this is the structure. Okay, so what the paper says is a two-stage procedure. Okay, the paper says, okay, imagine I have there are K models, okay, and have different M's. So you pick one versus the other. It's going to have different loadings on the different characteristics. And then the paper is going to say, given that model that I chose, I'm going to choose these precisions the best I can. And this is a very standard rational attention problem. Okay, this is where you have truth minus forecast given the signals that you have, and the signals depend on the precision that you chose. And then there's an extra step in which the paper is going to choose among the different methods. Okay, so if we connect this to the empirics, it's going to be sort of the taus are going to be like, do you choose like to focus on a particular part of the sales or the costs of a company, and choosing the M is going to be more like choosing a multiple versus a discounted cash flows approach. That's what the paper is trying to do here for us, okay? And now, this, you can put I's for everything, and then you make it dependent on the individual. So you're going to say, well, people with different costs of different precisions, they're going to choose the stuff that's cheaper for them. If they have a lower cost overall, they will put more, etc. If these V's that are the truth happen to be different truths for different people, then you're going to get different answers. I'm going to come to this point in a second. So this is the framework. And the predictions that Francesca gave you, again, the first three are pretty straightforward. If something is more relevant, if the V is high, you're going to put more weight on it. Something is more volatile. You have these Gaussianity assumptions, so you're going to put more attention to stuff that is very volatile. It's going to have a big impact on your mean square error. And of course, something is easier to process. If the C is very low, sure, you're going to put a lot of attention in terms of precision there, okay? Of course, things can be shaped by individual characteristics. Attention is sparse. Let's just be clear, this is happening because you have a linear constraint. If you have linear constraints, things can be sparse. That also happens when you do, consumer demand. Things are linear, you can get zeros there. And then the paper talks a little bit about, there's more of a broader discussion, think about over and under reaction, depending on different topics. Now, these are the remarks I'm going to make about the model. So this is a very standard Gaussian rational attention environment with an entropy constraint, okay? And this is a very rational framework to think about all of this, which it's perfectly fine with me, okay? So, but I think there's some tension sometimes in this kind of models. I'm going to point one that I think the paper also understands, and there's a footnote on this, which is like, if you could choose the M's freely with no sort of constraints, or if instead of being discrete choice, you can choose any M, you would choose the M equals to the V in this model. Okay, that would be sort of the optimal choice for you to do. Okay, and there starts, this sort of creates different tensions. Same with more broadly with the rational attention approach. Your people are really being rational in the way they are processing information here. Okay, now my take here is I don't think the contribution of the paper is to solve or propose a new framework to think about this. It's more like it's a model to guide empirical findings. And in my head, I can think of very different models of belief formation that are not quite the rational attention one that we're using. So my thought here would be like, maybe it would be nicer to have something perhaps even richer in some sense that really nests different cases. Maybe we can start to use some of the empirical findings to try to rule out different models rather than sort of be wedded to the one which is put over here. Okay, so I really think rather than emphasize this model in particular, I think it would be nicer to have a bit of a richer theoretical framework to sort of start to tease apart different versions that people have worked out, et cetera, trying to guide better the way we look at the data. So that's what I'm going to say about the model, which was the first part of the paper. Second part is the data collection. As Francesca explained, she didn't spend much on the talk, but they have this multi-step LLM because, as you know, if you have you may have experienced this yourselves. If you put a very long thing on whatever you use, Claude, ChatGPT, or whatever, it doesn't read very well the second part, so they really go through all of this. So they spend a lot of time on this, and what they're going to extract, as Francesca explained very well, is evaluation method, bottom line DCF versus multiple, or this different line of reasonings. Okay, like keep in mind that in each, I think that's also a useful number to me, each report has 39 of these ones on average, so you get a sense of what you're getting. Then they look at a subsample of it. Now, when you look at these things, I think the question is always how good are these procedures? Because these LLMs are black boxes, at least to me. It's really hard to understand what's going on. The paper has a lot of robustness. There's this similarity section that I think is very useful. Essentially, you run at different points and you see that you're getting the same results. You will be getting different answers. I think that's pretty good. You can see that I wrote this 2 days ago because yesterday we have Opus 4.6 and GPT 5.3, which are the latest. This thing goes so fast we can barely keep up. I think it would be really nice to sort of rerun these things down the road in better models, see if one gets like the consistent similar results. Okay, but again, I think they spent a lot of time thinking through different robustness checks on how to do it. One that Francesca didn't show that I thought interesting is this tells you in which part of the report you have more of the information. Tells you that most of it is sort of at the beginning and at the end. Okay, so this is something that seems very natural. You're supposed to always make your punchline at the beginning. That's what we're usually told. here you just have a lot of people sort of concluding the report to that way, but there's a lot in the paper, okay? So if you're interested in this, I cannot make justice in 15 minutes. I don't think Francesca can make justice in 30 minutes about it. And there's other stuff, for example, you can look at the evaluation methods, okay? You have both DCFs, you have multiples. This, for example, I thought this was interesting, time evolution of DCF and multiples. You see how there's a spike of DCF in the global financial crisis. I mean, you have negative earnings in this time for many companies, so it's going to be hard to use multiples there. I mean, it's as expected in a sense. Okay, but there's a lot of variation across a firm's size, age, industry. Again, you can go through all of the tables and really enjoy going through the pictures. That's in terms of the model. So let me jump now to the question of attention. Okay, one of the big arguments the paper is trying to put forward is that these things are sparse. Okay, and out of the 139 topics that are in the universe in the paper, each report has 16 on average. I have a comment here, and I think there's some refinements to this, but my first reaction was like, it's not obvious that every topic applies to every report. For example, some topics are like clinical trials, but if you have an auto company, I don't expect to show up clinical trials in their report. So I'm not sort of denying that these things may not be sparse, but I think more refinement on the way at least the data is presented or the number is presented would be a little bit useful, because again, we do not expect everything to be there. And again, maybe it should be 16 out of 30 once we do it, but I mean, something along these lines should be useful, okay? Francesca also talked a little bit about the persistent, okay? So the evaluation methods are much more persistent than the topics or that the attention that the analysts pay to. I think this is quite reasonable in a sense, sort of as expected. I mean, people are not going to be changing their infrastructure; they'll be changing how they tune it to. Okay, and this is connected to my next point, which is like the paper that sort of variance decomposition style thing and says, look, a lot of the differences across different individuals, things. There tends to be more variation on the attention side than on the evaluation side, and I feel like there's more scope to it in the sense that attention is like a broader set of things, while evaluation at the end is DCF versus multiple. So that's something that I also would like to see, refined in a sense in the paper. It's like another thought that I think could be interesting, because there's many more things that, the way they're framing the paper, that could be subject to changes in attention, not so much on the method side. In the interest of time, I think I'm running a little bit short. Let me just talk a little bit about the predictability return. So I know many people, I'm sure, probably thinking, well, that's probably the most interesting thing, right? How is this thing? How does it impact future returns? I think Francesca explained a little bit her thoughts. She showed the regression, which I spare you. I would love to see a sort of this Koibyonger-Nichenko style regression run in the model to have a clear interpretation of the coefficients. As you may or may not know, these CG-style regressions have been very popular in the last 10 years, partly because they have a very tight link to the theoretical models, and there's a lot of papers showing that for some models, some things that might be naively interpreted as overreaction actually are not quite there. And I think this is screaming for very carefully, sort of in a Monte Carlo way, within the model, try to help us to understand what are exactly the coefficients recovering. Again, it would be nice to dig a bit deeper through the economic mechanisms for predictability. What is this about? It's like, do people pay attention to the reports? They bring them in? I don't think the paper has much on this, and I think this would be useful. Again, trading strategies, strategic considerations. Haven't talked much about this, but the paper always makes the assumption that when we see the number, that is what the analyst believes, but there's always, and I think the paper talks a little bit about the strategic issues, but like, what are the incentives of these agents and so on? I think something that always has to be in the background of what we do. Okay, and again, the broader point is, are we really looking, is belief revelation, or is it kind of persuasion for people to do something when you do the report? I believe the paper has a little bit on this, but it's important. So now, my final comments in my last minute. Again, more stuff on outcomes will be great. One is interesting, two is super interesting. Data on actual portfolio positions, like do investors follow analysts with particular models? Any data along these lines will be useful. Analyst career outcomes, do you do better if you write one way or another? I think there'll be another outcome for how things look like. Again, I did like return predictability. I would like to see more. That's sort of the broader comment. And having me discussing this, you were probably expecting the final comment. We live with is this good or bad? Should we think about maybe having analysts required to use multiple methods? Should we have analysts required to separately disclose sort of firm versus micro justification, since we saw that they do it differently? I mean, I know this is a bit away from what the paper is doing, but I think it's sort of the next frontier in some of these topics. Try to really think about whether this is the right way of doing things. Maybe again, we don't have to force anybody to do anyone, but we can maybe nudge them on the right way, and how this have an impact on everything. So, in my last second, a nice contribution, very nice use of LLMs, a lot of nice facts. So definitely take a look at the paper if you're interested in understanding how this LLM works in a context that you might be interested in. I would love to see, again, a bit of a tighter connection between the theory of the empirics, richer outcome data. I think will really strengthen the paper. And again, I talk about the normative implications. Super nice area, very nice paper. Thank you.